The biggest scheme change Buffalo has made on either side of the ball in nearly a decade is about to be tested, and according to Athlon Sports NFL writer Doug Farrar, the early signs suggest new defensive coordinator Jim Leonhard is building something that aligns closely with where the entire league's most successful defenses have been trending. In a recent conversation, Farrar laid out a detailed picture of what Bills fans should actually expect from this defense in year one, why the personnel decisions already made reveal Leonhard's philosophy clearly, and why patience will be required before the full system manifests on Sundays. The Keon Coleman question looms largest before diving into scheme. Farrar identified the single biggest remaining question mark for the Bills heading into 2026, whether Keon Coleman can finally live up to his potential. The pattern from last season has created a wary fan base. Coleman had a strong spring and excellent training camp, and then delivered an unbelievable Week 1 performance in a comeback win over Baltimore before largely disappearing for the remainder of the season. Now, after another strong spring, Bills fans have adopted what amounts to a show-me approach. They want to see 4 genuinely productive games by Week 6 and confirmation that he has secured the number 3 receiver role behind Khalil Shakir and DJ Moore before believing the hype again. Farrar drew an interesting comparison for Coleman's game, likening him and Bears receiver Rome Odunze to the same archetype, not burner types who win vertically with pure speed, but contested catch specialists. His comp for Odunze was Anquan Boldin, never an elite athlete by measurable standards, but a player who could simply out-physical defensive backs when the ball was in the air. The challenge for Coleman, as Farrar put it, is that the spectacular catches have always been there, but they're too often undercut by drops on routine plays like swing passes. The transition from dominating in college to surviving in the NFL is fundamentally about what happens above the neck once the athletic advantages disappear, and Coleman has reportedly acknowledged this gap himself, saying in spring interviews that he understands the stakes if he doesn't close it. Why modern defenses are moving away from the blitz, the conversation's deeper substance centered on a fundamental shift Farrar has tracked across the last 2 Super Bowl champions. Elite defenses are now winning by creating confusion rather than by blitzing. The Eagles dismantled Patrick Mahomes in Super Bowl licks without blitzing once. The following year, the Seahawks rushed only 4 defenders on every single snap against the Patriots and ran dime personnel on 40 of their 72 defensive plays, a staggeringly high rate that reflects just how much the math has changed in the secondary. The driving principle, according to Farrar's reporting, including conversations with Seahawks head coach Mike Macdonald and longtime coordinator Dick LeBeau, is interconnectedness. Every level of the defense, the front, the linebackers, and the coverage shells has to move together on every single play. It's not about overwhelming pressure. It's about forcing the quarterback into a half second of hesitation by disguising what he's actually seeing before the snap. LeBeau, who Farrar spoke with at length, confirmed this was always his philosophy with the Steelers: never call the same front twice. Leonhard was already doing this in college. What makes Leonhard's hire particularly intriguing, Farrar explained, is that this modern defensive philosophy isn't new to him. He was running it 5 years ago as Wisconsin's defensive coordinator. Reviewing tape of Leonhard's final season calling that defense in 2022, Farrar found he was already deploying nearly 300 different stunt packages and 4-man fronts designed to manipulate offensive line protections rather than simply generate pressure through numbers. That's the same philosophy McDonald described to Farrar for the Athlon NFL preview. The goal isn't pressure for its own sake. It's forcing the offensive line into uncomfortable adjustments and planting seeds of doubt in the quarterback's mind. Positionless defense with real limits. On the broader trend toward positionless football, Farrar offered an important caveat: there are real physical limits to this concept. You're not going to see a nose tackle playing cornerback. But the trend of defensive linemen dropping into coverage, something LeBeau pioneered decades ago, has actually evolved into something more sophisticated rather than dropping a lineman as a gimmick. Modern defenses are building rosters of linebackers and hybrid defenders who can credibly play multiple spots so that the entire front and coverage shell can shift from snap to snap without it looking obviously flashy. Farrar cited a memorable quote from former Falcons head coach Mike Smith from roughly 15 years ago. NFL defenses were moving from being about positions to being about spacing. That's exactly the operating principle behind Buffalo's offseason additions. According to Farrar's read of the personnel, virtually every defensive player Buffalo brought in, whether through the draft or free agency, has positional versatility built into his profile. He ran through several specific examples, T.J. Parker kicking inside from the edge, Davison Igbinosun and Tyreek Stevenson both capable of playing outside or in the slot/overhang role, Elam capable of playing stack linebacker or edge, Zane Durant, who played roughly 30% of his snaps at nose tackle for Penn State despite a slighter frame, Jalen Kilgore as a press slot specialist, plus veteran additions like Garrett Johnson, and DeMarcus Alford, who've shown multi-position flexibility throughout their careers. The 12-player youth movement, one of the sharpest contrasts Farrar and the hosts drew between this regime and the previous defensive staff. Roughly 12 defensive players from Buffalo's last two draft classes are expected to play meaningful roles in this new system. That represents a significant philosophical departure from a prior approach that leaned more heavily on proven veterans. Farrar connected this to a story from former Seahawks head coach Mike Holmgren, who told him years ago that he'd shifted his own philosophy over time, concluding it was actually better to bring in young, fast players and teach them the defense together from the ground up, rather than relying on a veteran-heavy unit. Farrar watched that exact process build Seattle's Legion of Boom from scratch starting in 2010 and sees Leonhard attempting something structurally similar in Buffalo, even if the specific scheme looks different. Managing expectations for year one asked directly how realistic it is for Leonhard's full defensive vision to manifest in year one. Farrar was candid, it will take time. He pointed to McDonald's own first season in Seattle as a recent example of a similar transition requiring patience before the scheme fully clicked. Leonhard himself has reportedly said the team will be aggressive, not reckless, language Farrar interpreted as a signal that the rollout will be deliberate rather than an all-at-once installation that risks overwhelming players. He drew a parallel to how the Eagles handled multi-position defensive back Cooper DeJean as a rookie, starting him at his best position and gradually expanding his role, rather than throwing the entire playbook at him immediately. Farrar estimated Buffalo might be operating with something like 50% of the full defensive playbook installed in the first half of the season, a necessary compromise given the Bills' Super Bowl or bust expectations, unlike a rebuilding team that can absorb a slow start while the scheme matures. Buffalo doesn't have the luxury of opening 1-4 with a bottom-tier defense while coaches and players get on the same page. The teaching reputation that matters most, perhaps the most compelling data point Farrar offered, came from Denver. Pro Bowl cornerback Pat Surtain II has reportedly said Leonhard taught him coverage concepts he'd never considered before. A notable admission from a player already considered a top 3 corner in the league. That reputation as a teacher, Farrar argued, is exactly what this specific roster transition requires, given how much young and newly acquired talent Buffalo is now asking to learn a fundamentally new system together. Farrar's parting assessment was direct. Of all the new coaching and scheme situations across the NFL this season, Leonhard's Bills defense sits at the top of his watch list, both because of the respect Leonhard has earned as a defensive mind and because of the genuine uncertainty about how quickly a system built on disguise stunts, and full roster interconnectedness can take root with this much roster turnover. The early verdict won't come from training camp hype. It will come, as Farrar and the hosts agreed, somewhere closer to Week 6 for Coleman's production and for how connected this new-look defense actually looks against a real opponent.